Welcome everyone to a new edition of Let's Do Lunch. Today is Monday, which is our Business of Streaming Day. We have a terrific show planned for you. My name is Ned Sherman. I'm a partner and head of the Digital and Technology Transactions Unit at Manatt Phelps and Phillips. I'm also co-founder of Digital Media Wire, which is the host of Let's Do Lunch. Let me invite you guys to introduce yourselves. So please go to the chat right on the bottom nav and select everyone from the drop down and let us know who's in the house today. It's also a great place for you to post comments and chat throughout the show today. If you do have questions for the panel during the session, please put them in the Q&A area just to the left of the chat. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can during the show today. The show runs 45 minutes, so we will be ending right on the dot at 45 past the hour, wherever you are in the world. We do have guests that tune in from pretty much all over the place, and it's a really engaged audience typically. All right, without further ado, let me introduce our speakers today. We have Anjali Midha. Anjali is co-founder and CEO of Diesel Labs. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi, everybody.
And our moderator today is Colin Dixon. Colin is founder and chief analyst at Endscreen Media. Colin, great to have you back.
Thank you very much, Ned. Always good to see you. And Anjali, thank you so much for joining with us. Please do post questions as we go. We are going to be talking about some absolutely fascinating data that Anjali and her team at Diesel Labs has produced during this morning's discussions. And I know it's going to fire up some questions that you may have. But first, why don't we start with, let's talk about Diesel Labs, where it came from, and why you started the company.
Absolutely. And thanks again for having me today. So Diesel Labs started a couple of years ago. Fortunately, I've been working in media for quite a while in my career. And, it was a couple of years ago, we saw the writing on the wall that the way we think about content and classifying content was fundamentally changing. So previously, we used to look at just what I might call traditional television content, but with, all of the short form video coming into the picture, live streams coming into the picture, even things like podcasts and Fortnite, I thought it maybe was going to become very important for someone to start to think about that entire landscape and put all of that together in a meaningful way so that we could learn about how audiences are moving through content and how they're enjoying, all the different flavors that are out there.
So you come with a very specific pedigree that helped you see the gold in the social media mines, right?
You're too kind to frame it like that. But yeah, prior to this, I was over at Twitter studying media research. And part of what my charter was to sort of understand how people used social and video channels to react to all the things that they're watching, experiencing, et cetera. So I felt like it was a great source for this type of insight, and just, really happy to be here, kind of trying to uncover everything we can learn from those sources.
So let's talk about that data, because you very wisely, I think, distinguish between sort of, I guess we would call it first party social data and second party. So talk about how you grab that data, where it comes from, and that differentiation between those two types.
Yeah, absolutely. So we grab all of our data from places like Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok is one of our more recent platforms. We feel it's important to make sure we're grabbing information from the breadth of the social and video platforms that are out there, because as we all know, different people gravitate towards different platforms. They like to share things at different places. And many of us, including myself, I actually share different things in different places. So having the ability to kind of tap into all of the information in those sources is super important. But you also mentioned kind of first party versus second party, which is a really, I think, neat way to put it. And I might steal that from you, because there are so many different kinds of engagements. There are so many different ways to express yourself around content. So we're very careful with, what types of content or engagements, if you will, signals from those platforms we use to derive different kinds of insights. Sometimes you just want to know what the biggest thing is, and that's great. But other times you want to know, hey, Anjali has been, watching this thing over here, and now she's talking about this other thing over there. And so at different times, we'll leverage different flavors of the data to kind of make sure that we're being very responsible, I would say, with the insights. It's not a numbers game. Do you know what I mean? It's really about quality insights that can help drive real business decision making.
Yeah, I love the way you carefully differentiate between somebody liking or forwarding and somebody posting. That seems like a very shrewd way of getting really good quality data.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, let's say I followed you on Twitter, just as an example, right? Because I'm a huge fan of yours. I might just go around liking everything you're saying, even if I'm not totally caught up on all of the content you've been watching. So we are very, very careful, like I said, with which behavioral signals we think infers viewership or engagement with content.
Right. Now, one of the things I really love about the approach is it gives companies a pretty unique view of the performance of their content, right? Companies are awash, streaming companies are awash in what they call first party data, which is they're watching us, watching their content. But that really doesn't give them a benchmark against other content, does it?
Exactly. Sometimes I frame it as, these platforms have near perfect intelligence on their own audiences. And we know that, Netflix, for example, is observing what we're doing, what we're watching, when we drop out of an episode halfway, et cetera. But what they don't necessarily know is when you leave Netflix to go to Disney Plus or to go to HBO Max, what are you actually choosing to watch outside the bounds of their platform? And just imagine how important that information is when you're the one responsible for figuring out what to make next, right? Because part of your charter is to make sure that you're keeping people in your platform as satisfied with your content as possible. So that becomes, I think, a very important set of information that we're finding our partners are using to their advantage.
Right. And you do that by sort of measuring engagement, what you call engagement. Mm-hmm. And that comes back to this, posting about stuff. So talk to us a little bit about how people are actually, how your clients are using this data. What are they doing with it?
It's a great question. I have some answers for you, but to be honest, I think people are doing some super creative stuff that I may not even totally know about these days because there's so much top secret research going on. But the main things our clients are doing, of course, is related to content strategy. So this is what we were just talking about. What else should I be thinking about? So let's say you have a segment of people on your platform who just aren't watching much of your stuff. Then the next natural question is are they just low consumption people, or are they actually spending the majority of their time somewhere else doing something else? And these are sort of some of the questions that we can help address. I would say the second big chunk is really helping marketers. Launching content is really tough right now. We're surrounded. One of the actual views in our data helps us understand every single piece of new content that's coming out every single day. And I have to tell you, it's officially like below the fold on our side. It's pages and pages of stuff that are coming out on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. So how do you actually break through? How do you get audiences excited for your thing and aware that your thing is coming out next? So that's a big part of where our data plays an important role. And then I would say the third area really is when it comes to TV operating systems. So you and I both know there is absolutely a lot of, I would say, a race, if you will, to be the portal for people to get to their content, right? We all know set-top boxes are probably a thing of the past. We all now get our content through the Rokus and the Samsung, TVs, et cetera, of the world. Having information to help power those experiences, to put the right content in front of the right people, the right advertising in front of the right people, is another extremely important place where our data, I think, is making an impact.
So you're actually able to differentiate platforms, or how does that work?
In some cases, but a lot of times we've learned that behaviorally, if you're talking about a piece of content, it kind of, with how you got to it is a little bit less important. This bigger signal is the fact that you're watching a particular thing. So, in the case of, like, let's say a TV set manufacturer, they can only see their own data, right? They can't see what you're doing inside of Netflix or inside of Disney Plus. And these are some of the areas where we can fill in the gaps. Because if you tell us what you already know about somebody, we can basically, with very high probability, tell you what they're likely to be watching in other places.
Right. And I think that's one of the things that I really loved about the data in your 2021 report that you just put out, which I strongly recommend people go pick up a copy of. It's fascinating, fascinating reading. I really got a sense that I was getting more of a 360-degree view of people as media consumers, whereas what we tend to have to do today is we tend to have to rely on Netflix or HBO telling us which of their content is really performing very well. But you give us a much more broad-based view of that, right?
I think so. And, that's not to say that the data that Netflix or HBO or even Nielsen is putting out isn't critically important. It's just that as we see the economics in this industry shift, right? Previously, it used to be just an eyeballs, a number, and a ratings game. We wanted to have the highest ratings we could for any particular show because that was sort of synonymous with ad revenue. Now, Wall Street is judging a lot of these companies based on their subscribership and the lifetime value of having a subscriber attached to your platform or subscribing to your platform. So as we see those shifts take place, we need to make sure the data we're using is keeping up with that. And that's part of what the engagement data is doing that we have here. So we like to look at the whole industry and say, okay, it's one thing to know how many millions of households watched thing A or thing B. It's another thing to understand what was the impact that had on audiences and subscribership as a whole, because ultimately that is sort of the winning metric right now.
Right. One of the things that kind of surprised me was this idea of when people are playing away from home, when they're not watching your content. You gave a really very clear picture of where they were actually going, right?
Yeah.
Tell us what you did there.
Yeah, absolutely. So because, again, we're looking at, tens of millions of people and all of their behaviors across all these social platforms, in a lot of cases, we have the user level analysis to go with that. So we know that, people who are watching, this title on your platform are also heavily enjoying these other things in other places. And we can actually do this in a few ways. We can actually do it as a probability statistic to tell you what the likelihood is of someone actually, doing that in the future. We can also look at what we call just the sheer overlaps, literally the proportion of an audience that did thing A and is doing thing B. And that, I think, starts to, when you add those up and you start to look across genres or across platforms, I feel like it's very important to know if I'm a new streaming platform and if 50% of my audience also in the, last month spent time with Disney Plus or HBO Max, I feel like that's information that I would really want to know. And so that's part of the reason why we're producing this for all of our partners.
Right. One of the things that popped out from the data as I looked at it was that, something we would expect, which is Netflix, certainly loomed very large. And what you did in the report, which I loved, was you sort of said, okay, for HBO Max, for people that are watching HBO or posting about HBO Max content, what are they also posting about, from which services? And, for all of the services that you really talked about, at least half of the folks were posting about Netflix content.
Yes.
But there were some other very interesting relationships. You want to point out anything there?
Absolutely. I think for me, the one thing that I always get surprised about is when we look at things like share a voice, for example. So we look at, what is the proportion of new content being released by a platform like Netflix. And I like the way you frame it. You just said it earlier, which is they loom very large. It is certainly very hard to get away from Netflix because they are very prolific with their content. They released almost 55% of all the new titles in the United States last year. And when you look at Disney Plus, just as an example, they released about 6% of all new content last year. But when you look at their actual share of voice, the impact that they have on audiences, both of them roughly generated about a third of all the engagement that we saw. So just imagine per title how much sort of larger those Disney Plus titles are that we all know and love. And we know this is, it comes down to the vault that they have, the amazing franchises they have. I mean, they've done, they've spent decades perfecting the art of what they do with regards to Marvel and Lucas. But Netflix is right there in the game. They have a very different strategy. Theirs is more about content quantity as well as quality. And it's super interesting to see sort of how the share of voice out there is ebbing and flowing as different pieces of content come out.
That was particularly striking, that they seem to get so much more bang for the buck out of their content spend with the originals than Netflix did. Netflix seems to be, taking the shotgun strategy here and just producing a heck of a lot of stuff. And
you could say that. I would also argue, though, that Disney is probably their slightly bigger budget pieces of content. And I know we don't have the budget information for everything, certainly, but that it is interesting to see that two incredibly different strategies are both performing so well in terms of engaging audiences. It really tells us that there are a lot of different ways to actually come at this and to engage with audiences. And I think what's going to be really cool is over the next year or two to see if there are other strategies that emerge that work just as well.
Right. HBO Max also seemed to do pretty well in that department as well, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it goes without saying. I think we all know and understand that, of course, when they made the call to put all of the Warner Brothers movies, shift them from essentially theatrical release into HBO Max releases, there were some ruffled feathers, of course, because a lot of these contracts were forged years ago, before COVID, before we kind of knew that things might be shifting around. But with that aside, we know how much of an impact those films had in creating a ton of energy around HBO Max, creating essentially a solid base for them as well. And it is, again, 3 different platforms, 3 different media companies, 3 totally different strategies that are all doing exceptionally well.
Right. And just to remind everybody, I'm talking with Anjali Mida. She's co-founder and CEO of Diesel Labs. And we're actually talking about some very, very interesting data that they released at the beginning of this year. So if you have questions, please do put them in, put them into the Q&A window. Don't put them in the chat. I may not see them there. I want to stay with the data a little bit for a minute here, Anjali. There was another thing that you did that I also thought was really interesting, was you were able to separate people that were new posters about a service's content, right? So walk us through that, because it's a very important distinction, and what you were able to do with it is also really, really important.
I'm glad you asked. This is kind of one of my favorite things. I always love to share this, but sometimes it's a little complicated, but it's one of the more interesting analyses that we actually have here at Diesel Labs right now. So think of it this way, where we here at Diesel have been measuring the world of content for several years now. So since the inception of a lot of the platforms that we know and love, we've been there. And also we can go backwards in time with many of our data sources. So what we've done is we've essentially created a definition of the audience for Disney Plus, for Netflix, for HBO Max, just since we're using those as our examples right now. And we actually have essentially a defined population who we know have engaged with either, their original titles, have expressed that they're watching the platform, any number of ways that you can sort of self-select into being as a part of that audience. Then what that means is that anytime there's a new title out there, we can actually figure out precisely what proportion of that audience is net new to the platform in question. So basically, we can tell you what the lift is in terms of new people coming into the conversation. And not to belabor the point, but the reason that's so important is because anytime you get new people involved in talking about your stuff, those are impressions, right? Those are unsolicited impressions, which we all know and love in social channels. Everybody wants to go viral. I use air quotes there on that one. But we know why it's important for people to see recommendations about content from their friends and the people in their social networks, in addition to seeing some of the paid efforts that the platforms themselves can put out there. It's that mixture of seeing the mix of it, when it's like, oh, everyone's watching this, and I'm being reminded it airs tonight. When all of that happens sort of super well together, that's when you start to see the needle move in terms of subscribership and, hopefully pieces of content taking off and really becoming a part of the cultural zeitgeist.
So using that data, you were actually able to look at the titles from last year and establish which titles attracted the most number of new posters. And
Correct.
that data shows that HBO Max absolutely killed it last year, right?
They did. I mean, it's important to remember that Netflix has been around for a little while longer, right? So they certainly have built up their audience over a longer stretch of time. But yeah, I mean, gosh, when you look at the amount of, each title worked so hard for HBO Max. And I think thanks largely in part to their strategy, where they did bring those theatrical releases that were so highly anticipated. It actually brings me to one other flavor of our data that I talk about a lot. And I know my team is probably sick of hearing me talk about it, which is, we call it anticipation. I find this to be one of the most important metrics that we have, because what it does is it helps you understand, okay, well, am I breaking through with this new piece of content? Do I see about the expected levels of people anticipating my, for example, next season of Bridgerton, or is it higher or lower than my normal season 2 premieres? We can measure all of that. We can see how that's working and thus inform, should you be putting more marketing dollars behind something, or should you maybe cut the marketing budget down a little bit if it's not working as well as you originally thought? All of these things are essentially being decided with the support of the Diesel Labs data.
Right. I want to really dig into the HBO Max stuff a little bit there, Anjali, because I found this particularly interesting. I was talking with my Inside the Stream podcast partner, Will Richmond, last week about the merger of HBO Max and Discovery and the fact that they're planning on putting those two together. And one of the things I've been trying to do is figure out where HBO Max's growth has come from, whether it came from when they created this super content aggregation thing called HBO Max with all the Turner and Warner Brothers movies, or whether it was from the movies the first run movies that they released last year. And boy, it was loud and clear in your data. It was the movies, wasn't it? You said that Zack Snyder's Justice League, 15.5% audience lift. Godzilla versus King Kong, 12%. Space Jam, what is it? A New Legacy, 10%. And these things are like an order of magnitude higher than most of the other performance indexes that you calculate for the other services, right?
Correct. Yeah. And I mean, I'm not totally surprised, because again, remember that these are all massive titles, huge franchises, and they were slated for theatrical release. So these aren't just your ordinary shows or movies that come out every once in a while on different platforms. Like I said, I can't speak to the contracting aspects of that decision and how, some of the folks involved in these projects felt when that decision was made. But certainly we can see the outcome now for HBO Max, now that they've, we've seen how much of an impact those movies did have. It is exceptionally impactful. And, you look at, that's, I'll just say that not all movies performed that well either. So we have seen that, for example, Netflix has been slowly introducing what I would call more blockbuster type films into their roster. But, it's the ones that HBO Max put out last year. I think part of it also is that we all thought we were getting something for free, right? So many of us who were already subscribed to the platform, it was a gift. It was like all of a sudden, wow, okay, great. First of all, I can stay safe and stay home. And then to boot, I was getting, top quality content at a very fast clip. Almost once a month last year, they had something big and meaningful coming out.
Right. I want to mention Disney Plus as well, because there was really interesting data there again on the audience lift. One of the things that I've been looking at pretty closely is exactly how many new engaged subscribers Disney Plus has been attracting over the last year. It's very clear that they have been attracting subscribers. I think they said they grew 6.5 million in the North America market last year. But I've really wondered about how engaged they are. And your data sort of increases my worry about that, because their biggest title was WandaVision with an 8% lift. So that's an 8% new posters.
New people.
Right, about that. But their next title was only 1.8%, which was The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which suggests that wasn't a big draw for new customers. That was, though it was very popular, it was mainly watched by existing subscribers.
Well, and I think that when you think about it, if you think about the trajectory of Marvel, that is kind of what Marvel is known for, right? It's, you had WandaVision, which was the first miniseries that was introduced on Disney Plus as a part of the Marvel series. And then you had the subsequent ones, which logically were basically servicing those same individuals. So people who were going to sign on and get involved because they were engaged with Marvel content came there for WandaVision and certainly stayed for the Falcon, Winter Soldier, Loki, Hawkeye, et cetera, as the year progressed. I think it's interesting too. There's another data point, which I don't think is in the report, but we see the same behavioral pattern with Lucas as well, with the Mandalorian having done a ton of heavy lifting. Plus it came out like days. I think it came out with Disney Plus, if I'm not mistaken, or within days of Disney Plus becoming available to people. And then now we have, the Book of Boba Fett, and we see sort of something very similar, which is a lot of those same Lucas people who are engaging with the new content. So the way I kind of think about it is these new titles in both of these arenas are really meant to mitigate churn. When you think about content, right? Some content is designed to bring in mass amounts of new subscribers, but you also have to have content to make sure people don't say, oh, you know what? I can cancel the service now because I've already watched everything I'm interested in and I can move away. That's another place where Wall Street judges these companies pretty harshly, right? It's not just in the subscriber growth, but it's also in churn. And so that's one of the reasons why I think Disney has a super interesting strategy where they are continuously introducing new content, but they're also very strategically introducing content for the people who signed on because of Lucas and because of Marvel.
Right, and that's why that the fascinating thing about your data is you really allow me to now distinguish quite clearly between what content did a good job in attracting new subscribers and what content is doing a good job in keeping my existing subscribers, right?
Exactly. Like I use another example from last year, which I think everyone knows and loves, which is Squid Game and Red Notice, right? For Netflix. Squid Game was, according to Netflix's own data, certainly this is the information they put out, Squid Game was their #1 most watched show, and Red Notice was their #1 most watched movie, but they both had substantially different levels of impact within social media. And I look at Squid Game, it clearly was a mover and a shaker in terms of subscribership. Netflix's own data, they've put out that it was worth nearly $1 billion to them at the end of the day. Red Notice was hugely watched, but it didn't have quite the same impact in terms of engagement, et cetera, but it kept a lot of people happy, right? It entertained a lot of people on that Friday night when it came out. And certainly if you're one of those people who are subscribing to Netflix, it did a good job of making sure that you had that fresh, new, cool thing to watch. Now, did Red Notice perform the way Netflix had wanted it to perform, given it was a $200 million blockbuster? Perhaps not. But again, content can have an impact in a myriad of different ways that, can all be important.
Right. So, as I say, fascinating data. In just a second, I'll put a link, or maybe Anjali. No, I'll put a link in the chat so that everybody knows where to go grab that, because it really is. We've only scratched the surface. There's a lot more data in there.
Yeah.
So I really do strongly recommend people give it a look. So let's look forward a little bit. One of the things that we mentioned in passing, I think, was Nielsen. one thing that your data really emphasizes to me is this is data that even Nielsen has difficulty in benchmarking the performance of content across services like this. I think they're really only reporting on the top 4 or 5 services and the performance of the content in the top four or five services.
Yep.
So where do you think we're going with measurement? Obviously, you have a measurement-based company. Are we going to stay where we have been, where Nielsen was the sort of voice of truth, or what do you see happening going forward? Are we going to have multiple voices of truth now, or what's going to happen?
That I do think we're going to have a couple of different slices of data that are all going to be equally important. And the reason I say that is not because I'm obviously incredibly biased and would love for Diesel to be a player in that arena.
Of course.
But just taking my Diesel hat off for a second, and just as a measurement person, I truly feel that viewership is only telling us half the story right now. Whereas before, it really told us the whole story, right? Before, when we wanted to understand the economic performance of content, viewership was really all we needed to know, because we knew that, okay, 10 million people watched this thing, therefore ads were sold, for those 10 million people. And that was a very simple, easy to understand revenue model. It's not that simple anymore. Now you have some companies that still have ads that are being served in the middle of their SVOD content or their AVOD content. We also have situations where there are no ads, where the streaming platforms are being judged solely on their ability to obtain or attract and then retain subscribers. And I think because now we are looking at so many different ways to consume the content and distribute the content, that we're going to need to have a few ways to measure it. And in my humble opinion, again, being a biased person that I am, I do think engagement is an incredibly important equalizer, because whether your content is ad supported or not, whether it's theatrical or intended for a service or traditional television, whether it's a live stream or not, engagement equals that playing field. We are looking at just the total and sheer volume of engagement with anything, be it Fortnite, be it the live stream of an award show, or, Versus, which is a very popular music live stream, or be it the Justice League, the Snyder Cut, right? So we can actually look and actually equate all those things and do exactly what you're saying. How many people from, the live stream are watching this other thing? How many people talking about playing Fortnite are doing, XYZ? This is what I think is so critical to how we move forward as an industry, is making sure that we're supporting all the decisions being made with the best data that we can get our hands on.
Right. Yeah, you bet. And I just want to encourage people, if you have questions for Anjali, please post them to the Q&A window. And Adriana, you posted a question. Maybe I'm a bit thick this morning, but I didn't quite. Could you just qualify what you asked, and I'll make sure to ask Anjali that question. So it seems to me that the Diesel data then is adding a dimension to the picture that was pretty much absent beforehand, right?
Yeah, and I mean, we've been measuring engagement with content for a while, but I don't think that we had been doing as sophisticated as a job as we are now. I think now that we understand that there's so many more questions than we have answers to, and it's really becoming important for us to start filling in those gaps with the information that we can get our hands on. So, you mentioned at the start of this question, I think you even said, like, what is the future? What does it look like, whether it's for the industry or for Diesel in particular? And, the way I look at it is, it's my job to try to stay ahead of what the needs are of all of my partners and friends, honestly, in the media space, who are doing their jobs are getting harder and harder by the day, because they're being asked questions that are so difficult to answer. What should you make next? It's a really hard question. I mean, these are multi-billion-dollar budgets that need to get spent in really, really smart ways. And every piece of content that you're putting into your overall catalog matters a lot. And so if that when I think about where Diesel goes next, it's really about making sure that we're keeping up with the needs of the platforms to always be putting out the best content and to give the best experiences to audiences, because at the end of the day, that's what's going to win.
Yeah, one of the things from the report that I thought was particularly interesting was you gave a profile of which content types seem to be working most, seem to be most engaging across each of the services. And it actually gave a really interesting picture because now each of the services, they seem to have a particular character, right?
I would say yes, but I would say that it's still fairly malleable, right? That everyone's still finding themselves. We're in like this moment where we're still growing up in the service, but it is kind of one of those things where when you think of like, I'm in the mood for just like some, really well done drama, then you think of HBO Max. I'm in the mood for some really like fun, entertaining content with characters I know and love. You might think about Disney Plus, etc. So defining the brands of the different platforms, it's also, at the end of the day, it's marketing 101, right? You got to make sure that you're the best at your thing, and looking at it through the lens of genre is one way for us to start to understand that.
Right. So let's talk about more broadly about where you see the industry going over the next year or two, and if you could talk about how you see Diesel Labs growing into the opportunity that change will bring.
Absolutely. I feel like right now there is a very, very important and correct emphasis on the content itself. So we've seen a lot of M&A activity this year with, for example, Amazon buying MGM, which I think just closed, and then of course Discovery and Warner Media. So I do think we're going to see more of that going forward, just because everyone is looking to have the bakers in-house, right? Because otherwise you're fighting for access to those bakers and you're fighting for the output of those bakers. So I can see that happening more and more. Is that necessarily the best thing? It's hard to know if that's right or wrong this early in the game, but I can understand sort of wanting to make sure that there's nothing that's going to block your ability to create, develop, and then deliver great content at whatever clip it is that you need to be delivering content to the industry. So when I think about, where the next 12 to 18 months going to go, I think we do see more M&A activity, and I think we see a pretty good fight for which of all of the platforms now are going to survive. And I don't just mean in the SVOD space. There's the FAST space. There's we're full of acronyms in this business. So I think that there's a lot of offerings out there to consumers, and the question is, can all of them survive? Will there be some consolidation? Will there be the class pass idea so that you don't have to subscribe to 18 things and you can just watch what you need to watch? So going back to the cable model, these are questions I don't necessarily have all the answers to, but what I can tell or say about what we're doing at Diesel is we're preparing for those questions now. So as people start to ask them, whichever flavor of the question it ends up being, we're trying to make sure that we can at least provide some guidance that can then be interpreted by, the folks who are making these really important, but also very financially impactful decisions. They're not, that when I say M&A, I know I say it fairly lightly, but these are huge acquisitions, billions of dollars that are quite meaningful.
And I mean, I wonder what your opinion is on if the content spend is going to remain as high as we have seen historically. I mean, it looks like Netflix is continuing to commit to spending 15 plus billion a year on content. Disney is stepping up to spending actually a lot more when you consider their three services. So are you anticipating that level of content spend continuing, or do you think that people are going to be using data like Diesel Lab data to help really hone in on the stuff that's more impactful rather than going for impactful rather than quantity?
I think in the short term, we're probably not going to see much of a change in the sizes of content budgets because it's too risky right now, right? I mean, if you shrink your budget, but you don't have a strategic way to do that to make sure that the content you're putting out is the best in class content, that could be potentially a very devastating thing. Now, in 3 to 5 years from now, will content budgets be somewhat the same as they are today or potentially smaller? That's a great question, which I'm not sure about, but I think perhaps we'll have fewer companies making all of that content. So that might be one of the ways that the overall amount of spend in content might be either stable or potentially a little bit reduced. Then again, people are raising prices all over the place too, right? So, and Netflix's prices have gone up recently. I think Disney Plus probably had a price increase not too long ago. And with all of that, that dramatically also shifts sort of what we can do from a content spend perspective. So there's a lot of variables and I think the way I kind of think of it is it's like you're piloting a rocket ship with 1,000 controls in front of you. And any one of those controls could actually ultimately change the trajectory that you're on. So we're just trying to do the best job we can of creating as much information as possible about what audiences are doing to help with all of that decision making.
So I wonder, can your data equally be as well applied to the performance of brands in brand advertising in AVOD services, for example?
It can, and we already have actually all of the Fortune 1000 brands in our system, because we know that that's the next question, which I'm expecting, which, is going to come from the brand side who are trying to navigate all these platforms, all this content. How do you actually start to think about where you're going to target your ads, right? There's a lot of people out there now fighting for those ad dollars. So brands, yes. I mean, we're looking at podcasts. We're looking at gaming in a big way right now. As we all know, esports and gaming in general is an industry that's booming wildly and is still very much on an upward trajectory in terms of spend and, how much time people are investing in that content. So these are all things that Diesel is looking at. And part of the beauty of it is it's not even for us. It all just is part of the content landscape.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So in order for me to do the best job of getting the best data to everybody, I need to have all that stuff anyway. Now, whether or not we can help the brands directly is something that we're really excited to start pursuing this year, actually.
And that is, I think, probably one of the most exciting things about your approach. When I mentioned that you were 360 degrees, you really are 360 degrees. So you can tell things like, a Disney Plus subscriber, X% of Disney Plus subscribers are also gamers.
Yep.
And listen
and
to podcasts.
Not just gamers, but which games, and not just podcasts, but which podcasts, right? And we can even do things like look at topics of conversation that are interesting right now. So it reminds me of one analysis we actually did recently on cryptocurrencies. Who's talking about cryptocurrencies and how does that actually overlap with all of the viewers and engagers in all these platforms? Which one should, think about what, cryptocurrency related content or, whatever it might be. I know Netflix, within a couple days of those two cryptocurrency thieves or alleged thieves being arrested, I believe they put out, a press piece that said they're going to be doing a piece of content on that story as well. Those are things we measure here also, including books, right? Because you never know where the next amazing story is going to come from. Although I guess I shouldn't use the word amazing in relation to criminal activity, but you get my point. You never know where the next topic is going to come from. That could be fascinating to audiences everywhere.
Wow. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Well, I do want to give us over some time to answer the audience questions, Anjali. So we're going to go to those next. And while we're doing that, Emma, if you could put up there we go. The poll is already up there. Don't you be doing it though, Anjali. I want you to be focusing on the
I closed it, I promise.
So first question, Adriana did qualify her question, and I guess I was being a bit thick. She wanted to know if your company analyzes data on TVOD services or premium rentals as well as on the SVOD services. Mm-hmm. And do you also cover those services? So do you cover Vudu and Amazon Prime rentals?
Yep. No. So what we can cover is any new piece of content that's launching, even if it has a price tag attached to it. So Premier Access on Disney Plus, for example, things of that nature. Content that is very well syndicated everywhere, it's harder to sort of see sometimes in social the impact of that rental being available in different arenas. But what we can do, which is one of the things that my friends in the FAST space often ask me about, is we can tell you of your library of 100 syndicated films, which one is sort of popular right now? Which one is the one people are talking about or referencing or making memes out of or what have you? So those are definitely things we can do. Of course, as you guys know, the long tail of content right now is very, very, very huge. So we do our best to make sure that anything that's relevant to audiences, we're measuring and then can basically share that information with our partners.
And Marshall Cohen, he has an interesting question. He says, can you talk about why it's so helpful to a streaming service to know what their viewers are also watching on the competitors or other streaming services, or what content they are not watching?
Yes, absolutely. And I have to, total transparency, Marshall is one of our advisors. So I have to track him down and find out how he found out I was going to be here today. But thank you, Marshall, for the question. Yeah, just to kind of answer his question, which I think is an important one, if you know that, people are watching something more or are not watching something more, that again can feed directly into how much budget you're putting towards that flavor of content, how you're thinking of investing in it, how that fits into your overall content catalog. We spend a lot of time here at Diesel basically talking about the composition of a catalog and how important that is. As you guys can imagine, this actually goes back to what we were just talking about, where not every piece of content can be measured just by viewership, because some of that content isn't designed for every single person. Some of it's designed just for the people who love to watch the Great British Bake Off. Some of it's designed just for the people who love Only Murders in the Building. So being able to understand that and get very smart about it is incredibly important to understand where audiences are going, but also how you can then deliver the best content for them.
Very good. And last question I'll take is from somebody who's a little bit shy about sharing their names, anonymous attendee. It's interesting to know the details about the content superpowers and the decision-making for spending, etc. What about producers of passion-driven content, cars, sports, foods, etc.? Smaller budgets, but often huge audiences.
Absolutely. And it's funny that whoever this person is, I love that question, because one of the things we're doing here at Diesel is we're starting to work more and more with producers, with studios themselves, with showrunners, because we know that that's also an incredibly challenging task. It's, we talked a lot broadly today about content at like the title level, but even when you start to look at the title level, there's a lot that happens inside, right? All the episodes you have to create, the story arc that you have to create. Sometimes you make season 1 without knowing if there's going to be a season 2 or a season 3. Those are tough things as well. And that's a lot of the data that we have, again, because we look at the whole comprehensive world of content. That includes talent, that includes music, that includes brands like we were talking about earlier. So if you are in that world of thinking about how can you make the best content, within that project that you're working on, that's somewhere where we have started to provide data to partners as well.
Very good. Well, this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. Why don't we take a quick look at the poll results? So Emma, if you could take the poll down and let's take a look at the results. Here we go. And let's see, I asked, what was the last time you posted to social media about a show or movie? And it looks like most people, well, this group is not posting a lot. It looks like 24, about a quarter have done so in the last couple of days. And then there's a big gap. Looks like people are not posting. So this group isn't a heavy poster. Is that an issue with the data? Is there a certain type of person that posts a lot?
Absolutely. Well, yes, but it's funny because a lot of people ask or tell me in conversations, they're like, Anjali, I'm a lurker. Like, what do you do? What if there are people out there who aren't commenting on content at all? And the funny thing is that there are so many people, like I said earlier, tens of millions. I mean, I think at last count, we were looking at somewhere between 90 million people who have commented on content. Again, remembering that we measure everything from like, videos on YouTube to gaming, to topics of conversation, to books, to traditional media content. And so there is so much data that we have here at about any given title at any time. So even if 100% of the people watching something aren't necessarily commenting on it, that's totally fine. Also, I'll be honest with you, we're not all going to comment on everything you're watching, right? When you in the background have USA on the TV set, or you have, The Office playing in the background. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to comment on every single episode you're watching. But because, again, we're looking at tens of millions of people worth of data, we have a tremendous insight into how, like, generally speaking, how audiences are performing and even audiences of individual titles.
Very good. Okay, so the next question was, will Nielsen ultimately become the voice of truth for content performance in the streaming world as it was in traditional TV? Well, the overwhelming answer is no. It will be one voice among many. So it sounds like people are genuinely agreeing with what we said in the discussion, right?
I think so. And I'm not surprised to hear that at all, because I think we all can see that there is more information needed than just viewership these days to really understand what's going on.
Yeah. And then for a bit of fun, I asked which of these shows or movies was your favorite. These weren't shows or movies that popped up in your data, Anjali. And it looks like it's almost a dead heat, but not quite. Squid Game is the big winner, 35%. Okay. Only Murders in the Building, 29%. Wow, I'm surprised WandaVision scored so low.
Well, I think, when you think about the target audience for WandaVision, especially since we have a lot of media professionals here who, everyone has their appetite for different flavors of content. So, I mean, I'm not surprised at all. I think that this group here probably has, a very healthy appreciation for content that moves the needle and is doing exciting new things. And both Only Murders in the Building and Squid Game certainly did that.
Was there one that popped for you? Which one was the one that you enjoyed the most?
I always tell people, I'm like, I can't play favorites. I watch everything here. I'm fairly content agnostic on this side, but I do usually hint that back when I was a kid, one of my favorite TV shows was The X-Files. So I'm very much into, sci-fi, drama, that kind of thing myself. But the lucky thing about my job is I get to watch TV for work. So I have no complaints whatsoever.
Well, I got to say, for me, out of that list, it was Only Murders in the Building. Enjoyed that tremendously. Anjali, this has been fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Thank you, everyone, for your great questions. As usual, very intelligent questions from our audience here. So once again, thank you, Anjali. And Ned, it's back to you.
Thank you, Colin. And thank you, Anjali. Really enjoyed the session today. And audience, great engagement today. We always enjoy that. So join us again for another Let's Do Lunch soon. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you for having me.